This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the March 23rd edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale, joined by @DRF Formulator Mike Hogan.
Hello, Pete.
I was just waiting for you to say hi there, that's all. It's a little differently today. And our permanent guest, as it turns out, or our permanent guest lately anyway, Jonathon Kinchen. Jonathon, how are you today?
Hey, Pete. I'm still having a little bit of Eddie Logan withdrawal. It's been a tough. Yesterday was a tough day. I was talking to my buddy Robert, and I was complaining a lot. And he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I think I'm having withdrawals. It's weird. I can't figure it out." So
it's difficult. They treat you so well out there at Santa, specifically in that Eddie Logan suite with Richard and Orchidia and the rest of the crew out there, that when you get back to real life and you're just a normal person walking around, it is difficult. It's like you're 10 feet tall for a week and then you go back to normal size. I agree. It's been a difficult transition back to real life, but I will say this, I think my liver appreciates it.
Well, I tell you what, my stomach was a little bit mad at me yesterday. I had a smoothie for breakfast, and it's yelling at me like, "Where's the steak and eggs?" And so it's been a challenge.
Mike, what were you up to while we were out there gallivanting around Southern California?
Oh, I was just hanging around greater New York City, Manhattan, going to Central Park, watched some of the races on TV or the computer, just kind of my usual weekend stuff, since I don't really travel nearly as much as you guys do.
Well, if you're not going to travel, I'd rather be in the greatest city in the world. So at least you had that going for you, which
fair enough.
Plus. So, all right, we got to address the sort of elephant in the room before we go any further. We recorded a show on Friday. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say it was one of the better shows we ever did, and it has been lost to the world, or has it? What is the latest on the retrieval of the lost pod?
I frankly, I don't know. It's possibly, maybe, there's a chance it could get saved. Basically, the recording software we used, whenever we export it, it craps out. So we reached out to their IT support, and they're in the process of still seeing if they can recover it on their end. So fingers crossed, but once it does, or if it ever gets recovered, obviously, and the insights that we were giving on the weekend races will be long past, but hopefully some of the discussion that we had about wagering strategy, and particularly discussion on playing the pick six, will still be valid.
Well, you know what, Mike? In my opinion, that might be a win-win, because I think at least a couple of the horses we gave out on the show are actually still running, but it was more the discussion piece of the pie and just sort of the general vibe of the show that I think people will enjoy checking out. In truth, that's a little unfair to us. We did give out some decent priced horses who ran underneath, but the high standard we've been setting the last few weeks in terms of tipping on the pod was not quite met, but that's the nature of the beast in this game. Now, the other thing I want to mention, in case the lost pod never resurfaces, is the only thing I want to rehash here, because I just think it's too weird, is this idea that I threw out there that, well, it wasn't an idea. It was a dream that turned out not to be a dream, but a premonition, where the night before the show, I imagined that we had recorded an entire pod, except for one thing, it didn't actually record. And then I even stressed that during the show, but yet wasn't smart enough to take the extra safety step that I've taken today. And this one also came to me in a dream the following night, where I dreamt the same exact thing happened, except this time I had the presence of mind to backup record the Skype call that I'm making now, so we were able to save the show. So at least we have that going for us this time. We got a few things in our favor, and hopefully we won't have a second lost pod in a row. That would be a little too heartbreaking. And the only other thing I want to say about that is, in my dream, there were two things in my dream that I thought were potential improvements for the show. Somehow I'm editing myself in my dreams here. One was that the pod had a new theme, and it was I Do by the Jay Giles Band, which I think would actually make, a snippet of that I think would actually make an excellent podcast theme if folks want to go to Vimeo or YouTube and check out I Do by the Jay Giles Band. You can let us know what you think of that. And the other thing was I had an idea, or not an idea, it just came up in the show. We did a bit on the podcast In My Dream that was kind of fun. It was called Good Stat, Bad Stat. And it was like we would just take a look at some sort of random formulator stat for a race and then have a discussion if we thought that it told us something valuable or if it was just random noise, which I thought wasn't the worst idea for a podcast segment at some time in the future.
I like it. Well, we can at least, when we're discussing some of the races and I throw out some formulator facts, we can do a good stat, bad stat. Maybe even get a sound effect or two.
I do think it could be a good opportunity for a rare. That'll be one of our drops, along with the one I've suggested in the past of just Trevor Denman saying, "Believe." We can get those both on our little MIDI board and pop them in each other random. All right, enough of that nonsense. Let's move on to the stuff that we actually have to talk about today. We will loop back maybe and do a little bit more discussion of some of the fun we had at Santa Anita over the weekend. But let's start with a race that didn't happen at Santa Anita, but happened at Oak Lawn Park. And I'm talking about the Rebel Stakes, which was won by Cupid with, I believe, a buyer of 95. Here was a speed horse who did not break well, but then sort of found a seam very early in the race, got himself involved, settled once he got there, and then had a little bit of interesting hinkiness, we'll call it, in the stretch. I don't know if it was a lead change gone wrong or just some general greenness before straightening out and powering away and galloping out really well. Jonathon, let me ask you, is that sort of goofiness that we saw from Cupid something that makes you worried about his potential as a Derby horse?
No, they're young horses. He'll be fine. He'll get it all figured out. He's got a Hall of Fame trainer that obviously knows how to get a horse ready for the Derby. He's probably got, another 6-7 works, another race. He's got plenty of time to get whatever situation that kind of caused that to go wrong sorted out. It doesn't bother me at all.
That's a great point with lead changes, and we had a question on Twitter about, I forget the specifics of it, but it was specifically about, the way I interpreted the question was, when you see a young horse being goofy, is it a positive or a negative? Very much along the lines of what I was just asking. And I think I could spin it both ways. Honestly, for me, a bigger concern than the lead change issue or whatever it was would be the break, because I think you might have even in that field, definitely in that field, in my opinion, was maybe a little fortunate to be able to get that good position rather than being stuck after breaking slowly. The bad breaking isn't something I want in my Derby horse, and we've seen that from him a couple of times now. But Jonathon, do you keep that same idea that he's a young horse, he's an improving horse, and that's something that Team Baffert will work on between now and the next start?
No, that's a little bit more worrisome. Obviously, I'm sure it's something that Baffert and them will address, but if he breaks like that in the first Saturday in May, and there's no way he wins the race. So, it's obviously the difference between running in a 11, 12-horse field or whatever it ended up being versus a 20-horse field. But, that's a little bit more worrisome for me. Sometimes the lead change situation can just be a little bit of a focus deal. It could be a rider deal. The rider shifted his weight in an incorrect way, cutting the corner, whatever it might be. But missing the break is something that can be a problem that can kind of plague horses. It's something that needs to be addressed. And like I said, I'm pretty confident that it will be addressed. I was actually really impressed by the way that horse ran. I pride myself when I'm watching races. This is actually really funny. I actually do take pride when I watch races in my ability to walk away from the TV screen when I have won or when I'm winning or I'm going to lose at like the 16th pole. And I thought for sure Whitmore was going to win when I turned away from the screen and started to carry on, and then I looked back and he rebroke one, and so I was actually wrong, but I was pretty impressed.
We'll talk about Whitmore a little bit more in a minute, but Mike, first I wanted to ask you, let me say that you could pick one runner from the Bob Baffert barn to be your Derby horse. would you be looking at Cupid or would you be looking at More Spirit?
Probably More Spirit, partly because even though it was a much smaller field, I think the field in the San Felipe was a bit stronger than what we saw in the Rebel. Not to knock any of these horses, who I think some of them could be very good, but even Whitmore, who I think ran well, I don't know if he's really a contender on Kentucky Derby Day. And I think it is notable, granted Cupid was somewhat lightly raced, but I think it was notable that Baffert entered Cupid into the San Felipe to see how that race shaped up, and then decided to scratch and instead send to the Rebel. So that tells me that without talking to Bob Baffert, Bob felt More Spirit was potentially a little stronger of the two.
Baffert has said...
One more thing, though, is... I'm sorry to interrupt you, Pete. One of the things that I've noticed about Bob is we got into this discussion last year with someone about how, American Pharoah can't be that good. He shipped American Pharoah to Oaklawn and let Dortmund run it home. Well, I think what he does is he does a lot of those decisions on horses he thinks who can mentally handle it, who have shown they can handle it in the past with getting on a van. Obviously, I don't think Cupid's been on a plane to run before, but so I was the same way. I used to look at it as like, oh, he's dodging horses, but it could just be a situation in which he felt like Cupid's running style, being a forward horse, he's won a lot of races wire to wire at Oaklawn. Maybe Cupid, is a lot more relaxed and doesn't mind shipping. So not to discount that point that Mike made, but I wouldn't jump to conclusions quite yet. Just see a little bit more about those horses' individual personalities.
That's a fair point.
Yeah. I think it has to do with this idea, too, that Baffert has said before. He doesn't, unlike, we talk all the time about how dangerous a trainer like Bill Mott or Richard Mandela are when they have a target. Baffert is kind of the opposite. He has said that he works them and sort of decides on the fly. And it might make a little bit of sense at this stage of the game. Even week to week, he might see things that might impact that decision as well. So I don't think it's as negative necessarily as it might initially seem, just because of the sort of unique way he trains. And while it's maybe not unique, but I will say for a good horseman, I think that's a little unusual. I feel like the more old school way is to circle targets and sort of play the game that way. But with the success that Baffert has had, who can argue with his approach? And I think it might lead to some decisions like this that don't stand up well to the sort of vibe reading and other kinds of stuff that I typically like to do along the Triple Crown Trail. When it comes to Baffert, I kind of just trust that he knows where the horse belongs and take it from there.
Yeah, I will say this, though. Remember last year there was a big difference between American Pharoah and Dortmund in that from the beginning, after American Pharoah had that issue where he had to be scratched leading up to the Breeders' Cup, he was very clear that as soon as he came back to training, Baffert was targeting Oaklawn for his return. It was never a, well, let's enter him and see who we stack up against. Let's enter both of them into one race and see how the field shakes out. He was very, very confident with American Pharoah in plotting out a 3-year-old campaign for the 2-year-old champion. And so that's the difference, I think, between comparing certainly American Pharoah to a horse like Cupid.
Sure, but I think that you go ahead, Jonathan.
Like with Dortmund last year and with More Spirit this year, and I had this conversation with our buddy Eric Bialek, who was out with us in Santa Anita. He loves Dortmund, huge Dortmund fan. We have I thought that Dortmund and as well as More Spirit, because of their prior races, because Cupid and American Pharoah weren't ready yet, Dortmund and More Spirit earned the right by their performances prior to maintain their home field advantage and to stay on that track. It's like More Spirit was never going to ship based on More Spirit's races that he had run at Santa Anita, and the same with Dortmund. He was never going to ship based on the races he had won at Santa Anita.
In other words, you think he's a horse who due to the way that he runs, his physicality, something about him just suited to Santa Anita? Is that what you're saying, Jonathan?
No, I mean, I'm just saying that Baffert I think Baffert looks at it as like, look, if Cupid wasn't ready, Cupid was still trying to break his maiden, More Spirit was ready, More Spirit won at Santa Anita, and I don't care who has a better chance of winning. More Spirit has earned the right to stay here by, running well in stakes races at Santa Anita. You know what I mean? That's how I kind of looked at it.
I don't think that there's some validity to that point for sure. And I think as to the previous point that Mike made about the difference between sort of the confidence and the way that American Pharaoh was handled versus the way the sort of more typical way that Baffert deals with his 3-year-olds, I think all that shows is something that we knew already, which is, that none of these horses is American Pharaoh. These are developing 3-year-olds with potential, whereas I think Pharaoh from the get-go was one who, well, he already literally was a champion coming off his 2-year-old year, and I think Baffert thought of him with that kind of potential right away. So I don't think that's necessarily a knock. It's just a statement of fact that we're not dealing with an American Pharaoh situation here.
Yeah,
completely agree. I don't think we've seen an American Pharaoh yet this spring.
No. And we might not see one for a little while.
Yes, we talked a little bit about Whitmore. Jonathon, should he have won this race?
Well, I thought he was going to. I don't like to. I think it's I don't mind throwing the word hang around onto lower level horses. I think that sometimes they deserve it. I feel a little bit, I feel like a little less fair when I say it to stakes type horses, but I felt like he hung. He looked like he was supposed to run by that horse, especially with the start that horse had, the pace that horse had, and he just never really did. So that wasn't a great sign for me.
Bit of a roll.
Yeah, that was.
Oh, yeah.
That was going to be my question for you guys. Well, I was just going to ask you, was it a case where Cupid re-rallied and ran off, or was it a case where Whitmore should have won, but he, was kind of a bit of a hanging, a chandelier late, and allowed Cupid to get back in the race?
Yeah, I mean, Jonathon more or less already answered that, and I mean, for me, it's hard to say. I mean, I think that Cupid ran, despite a little bit of hinkiness there, I mean, he ran a really strong race. And the idea to take a horse like Whitmore, who now he's got these 2 graded seconds and could get a little bit forgotten at going forward, and maybe in a day where there's even, this was, from a flow perspective, this race favored Whitmore over Cupid when you look at where the early speed ended up. So you certainly can't see it as a positive for Whitmore. But at this, I think it's too early to I'm not going to argue vehemently with somebody who says he hung, but I think it's too early to give up on him too. I think he's still a horse who, as a 3-year-old here early in the season, could continue to improve. I guess I'm sitting on the fence a little, but if you made me say one way or another, I'm still pro Whitmore going forward.
And Pete made a good point at the top when he mentioned that Cupid's gallop out. I think in these types of situations, when you feel like there's a really fast pace and that the race could be potentially collapsing, when you look at the gallop out, it tells a story about what was really going on. I mean, in that situation, if the race is collapsing and Cupid is slowing and others are coming at him, he's supposed to get past in the gallop out. And in my opinion of watching the gallop out, I thought he re-rallied and actually was reaching late, which kind of made me fall in love with the performance a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's partly why I asked that question, because I was curious what you guys thought. Jonathon, it sounded like at first you were thinking there was a little bit of hanging going on by Whitmore, but that gallop out made me think it was a case of re-rallying from a horse that was a little goofy with the lead changes, maybe a little green in just, his 4th career start and his first graded stakes. I started leaning more towards, wow, Cupid could be pretty good.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a contradiction by me, but I think it's important to make the point. It can be both. I mean, Whitmore could have hung, and if he's supposed to be a Derby contender, you can argue that he's supposed to run by Cupid with dead aim and that momentum, and then you can also say, well, Cupid really ran his tail off and galloped out well. So it can be both, although it seems a little contradictory.
Well, Fence City, but that's sometimes, I mean, people don't like to hear it. It's more fun to listen to a podcast where you have like these super strong definitive opinions one way or another, but I don't believe in manufacturing those opinions when they're not there organically. The other point I'll make before I do want to talk about sudden breaking news, the morning line favorite going into that race, but before I ask you guys about that performance and the potential and the trip that was going on there, I just want to mention that this is a year for me where I'm still thinking of this as an outsider year at the Kentucky Derby, where I'm not. I mean, believe me, some of these favorites have run great races. I'm not anti them exactly, but I'm all sort of thinking the market is going to price up that front end of itself pretty well, and where the idea of reaching for an outsider, a stranger, little ET style, to use a good dated reference, is kind of appealing to me, and that's where maybe I'll give a little bit of an extra look, at least at this stage, to a horse like Whitmore, who you could just sort of see being completely forgotten in the betting, depending on how things shake out between here and the first Saturday in May. Does that assessment sound about right to you, Mike, or are you warming to some of these favorites on the Derby Trail?
I don't know if I'm necessarily warming to some of the favorites on the Derby Trail, but I'm wondering if Whitmore has a little bit of a far-right look to him, if you know what I mean, as a comparison to last year. Yeah, a bit of a horse who needs a pace set up, and maybe, especially if what happens last year happens again, which is when you've got good horses on the lead that are really quality horses, they often don't back up, and it makes it really tough for a closer to rally, regardless of how fast or contested the early pace is. So I wonder if there's a little bit of that going on from him. He would obviously have to step up and get a little bit of a setup, but at a big price, I guess certainly crazier things have happened.
A big price underneath, et cetera. There's a lot of different ways to get paid in the Derby.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, Pete. It seems like it's feeling like one of those derbies where there's going to be 3 or 4 horses that are going to take a lot of money based on, Nyquist, Heyman. Obviously, we'll learn a lot more about those 2 horses 2 weeks from now in the Florida Derby. But it feels like one of those derbies where there's going to be some horses that are going to be overbet a little bit, and there's going to be some opportunities to take some horses that have probably been forgotten a little bit at really good prices. It feels that way. Obviously, we got a lot more to figure out, but it feels that way.
All right.
You know what it feels a little bit like? Well, and sorry if I'm jumping the gun and leading to the transition, Pete, but it feels a little bit like this 2011 Derby that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute, but I do feel like sudden breaking news is worth at least mentioning, just because he could also now be sort of off the radar, and he probably had. I mean, granted, you could still call him a flow downgrade, I suppose, but he had a tougher trip than Whitmore, I thought, at least upon my first look at the replay. Did you guys have any thoughts on sudden breaking news and what we might see from him going forward?
Yeah, he's not one that I would ignore, but like you said, he is a little bit of a flow downgrade. I thought Whitmore moved a little bit earlier into the teeth of it, but I think both of them deserve another chance, especially just it all depends on what we get here. If we're losing front running speed horses come the first Saturday in May, then these horses look like terrible opportunities and terrible bets. But if we continue to gain speed horses, then they start to look a lot better.
All right, Mike mentioned the 2011 Kentucky Derby. This was the lost segment on the Lost podcast, because we were meant to talk about it on Friday, but we never actually got to it. So instead, we'll talk about it now. We've been doing this on the Friday podcast regularly, thinking we may move it to be a Wednesday feature with so many interesting races coming up on Saturdays. Maybe we'll be stepping up how many of the races we're tipping for Saturday on the Friday show, and this might be something that's great to talk about when we have a little more time and room to breathe on a Wednesday. So I actually have, unlike these other old derbies we've talked about where I was just sort of trying to half remember what I thought about the race, I actually have from my old blog my full write-up on this race. So I have that as a resource to go back to and refer to, and I can tell you exactly what I was thinking about each of the 20 runners or whatever it was in this Derby. But before I reveal any of that stuff, let me ask you, Mike, first. Who was your horse as we entered the 2011 Kentucky Derby?
Oh boy! Well, it's a race, and in some ways I do compare it to this year because it's a race where there are not a lot of horses that have run big efforts based on the buyer speed figures. The only triple-digit buyer figure was run by a horse named Soldat, and that was in an allowance race in the slop at Gulfstream. So everybody else, and when we talk about, some people say, oh, this is a slow year, where are the triple-digit figures? That is often the case. I think people just tend to forget that. So on paper, this was a really wide open race, and I was kind of keying around a few different horses, because this is the kind of race where if you liked a few, you got paid well. And I was kind of against the horse that ended up going off as the favorite, which is Dialed In. I just felt like he was maybe a little bit inexperienced to try, and without any sort of figure edge, to try the biggest field of his life and the longest distance of his life. I just didn't like him as a favorite, even at 5-1, which is a square price. So I was looking more at kind of the versatile types, like Nero, who could take or be close if he was allowed to, could rally from off the pace if he needed to, seemingly on the improve for Asmussen. I liked him a little bit, and Pants on Fire, who had that kind of same style, speed, but could stalk as well. Those were the two that were most interesting, and I wasn't really that enamored with our eventual winner, who certainly ran away with the show.
Jonathan, how about you? Heading into this race, do you remember what your thoughts were?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost embarrassing, but I was sold that. And I guess even in hindsight, I would be okay with that, because considering how slow the pace was of the race, considering how slow the pace was compared to other years surrounding it, sold that still made a little bit of sense. I was kind of still of that school of thought of, turf horses can run well at Churchill, and I thought he was going to run really well that day, and he didn't. I actually I bet the race really well. The only problem that I had was I tossed Dialed In and Nero, and I tossed them for the exact same reason. They both got setups in their last race, and blah, 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 blah. And Nero hopped up into the equation and cost me. I had Mucho Macho Man, I had Animal Kingdom. You guys hear me talk about this a lot. Animal Kingdom was the prime example of paying attention to the guys talking about workout reports, because everyone raved about his workout, and which kind of answered the question that he was going to handle the dirt. So looking down and seeing his name makes this really truly a difficult task, and why we call it redboarding the Derby, because all I can think about is how magnificent of a horse he is, and I cannot get it out of my mind that I would have picked him on top if I could go back.
Well, here's Pete. Before you go into your analysis that you had when you were, you've written up on your blog that people can find if they like, and maybe after this you could tweet out a link to it. But here's the redboard case for somebody that did not have Animal Kingdom. He was making just his 5th career start, seemed to be on the improve, and even though he'd never run on the dirt before, he had run on Arlington synthetic, Keeneland synthetic, grass at Gulfstream Park, and synthetic at Turfway Park. So, and he'd run well at all of those surfaces. Even though he's by Leroy d'Animaux, it seemed like he was versatile enough and running style versatile enough that if he took to dirt as well, and having run at 4 different tracks on 4 different surfaces, you could, I guess, make that leap that, why not dirt for a horse that seemed to be very good and on the improve. I guess that's the redboard case for him.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 points I want to make about this race, but I'll do my analysis first. I can tweet this out. It's semi-embarrassing. What I did do on this is 100% online, which is, I think, maybe a little bit interesting. And so answer me this. I'm just going to look at some of my lower odds horses, and I don't have the chart in front of me. Mike, do you have it in front of you?
I do, yes.
What price was Shackelford in the race?
Shackelford was 23-1.
Yeah, so according to my odds line, he would have been the bet. Let me take a look at let me give you a look at what I said about him. Though in real life, when I had to make a pick, I did pick the favorite. Dialed in. Here's my Shackelford case here. Shackelford has a bit of a funny side look. Not that he's run as fast as funny side he hasn't, but like the gutsy gelding, he was up close to the finish with the favorite in his last prep. And funny side's next. He was sent off several times the price, and of course he got the job done. Sound familiar, Shackelford fans? I'm going to use him if the price allows, and I called him 7-1. So but based on my odds line, that's where you would have gone. Dialed in. I think I was kind of wedded to him coming in here. I had found a future bet in England at a good price. I acknowledge the hostility about the horse. I talk about Shackelford being a larger price, but I describe a little bit of a wow factor from his preps, which in retrospect I think was more about the setups and less about any actual wow factor. But and then the other horse, of course, that I want to talk about quick is the winner, Animal Kingdom. Throughout my piece, I basically, there were a lot of synth horses in this Derby, and I sort of one through one went through and said, if I'm going to bet a synth horse in the race, it's not going to be him. And then when I got up to number 16, I said, if I'm going to bet a synth or turf horse in this race, it's going to be number 16, Animal Kingdom. But that's primarily out of deference to one of my favorite trainers in the game, H. Graham Motion. Still not sure looking at his breeding. I called him 25-1, which I'm actually really surprised I went that high. And I think I got kind of wedded to that because, in fact, what did he went off less than that, I'm sure.
Just a tick short, 21-1.
Oh, it was probably close enough. I should have let the Graham Motion fanboy factor carry the day, but I didn't. But looking back at this Derby, especially this year, one of the things I see the things that was the biggest stories of that week was the morning line favorite who was scratched, who was Uncle Mo after the Hamlet routine
right.
They went through that week, and then finally getting scratched. I think it's hard to look back at this Derby and not think about what a brilliant runner he was when he was on, and the impact he continues to have on the game. Jonathan, what was your take on Uncle Mo at the time, and how impressed? I mean, this is kind of an easy one, but how impressed are you with what he's done so far in the breeding chip?
Oh, he's been phenomenal. I was gonna single him that day if he ran. So obviously, I guess hindsight is like, well, I'm not glad he scratched, but he probably I lost anyways, but he probably saved me a little bit of extra money, but because I'm not really sure if he was going to get 1.25 miles. Maybe he would have healthy, but I think he's been amazing. I think he's done a great job. I don't know a lot about action or horse flesh, but when you watch him run, he just always had his head down. He was always digging. He looked so efficient, and so it's one horse that I've always been a huge fan of.
Amazingly, he's managed to stamp many of his progeny with that sort of head carriage you're describing. As I see it, you can kind of, not always, but you can kind of sometimes tell they're an Uncle Mo from the way that they run. And the horse, I always remember his debut, which was on the Travers undercard when he was sort of the worst kept secret in Saratoga, and still, I guess, a testament to the big pools on a day like the Travers, still ended up paying okay and won probably as easily as I've ever seen a maiden win in a good maiden race. Just a really cool horse, and not like I think he would. I think they clearly made the right decision there. I'm not sure that task was one he would have been up for, but it's hard to think back to that 2011 Derby and not have at least spend 90 seconds or so on how good Uncle Mo was. Mike, you have any other thoughts on this 2011 Derby before we turn the page?
I don't, but I think it's a good transition to talking a little bit about Dubai, which we'll discuss a bit more in depth on Friday, because California Chrome is trying to do something that 2011 Derby winner Animal Kingdom is one of the two horses that has done in the past, which is win a Kentucky Derby and win a Dubai World Cup. The
other being Silver Charm, if I remember correctly?
That's correct. That is correct. See, I didn't even have to. I knew I could trust you, Pete.
I watched that one. That was my early days of being a racing fan. I've talked before about how Cigar was so at the center of racing at that time, and being a fan of his helped get me into it. But the first horse I really fell for in a big way was Silver Charm, and I can remember. Of course it's not there anymore. There was an OTB not that far from where I'm sitting right now. It was probably about a mile south of here. There used to be an OTB down on Fifth Avenue in Park Slope. And I remember that morning, like going to a diner, and I was working for Simon & Schuster at the time, had some difficult editing assignment that was taking up the whole weekend, but making sure that I got out of there in time to get over to the OTB. The OTB on a Saturday morning back in the day in New York City was quite the sight, and not completely dissimilar, Jonathan, from the dungeon at Santa Anita where we spent plenty of time in this last week. But getting to watch Silver Charm pull off that feat, and now having California Chrome trying to do the same thing, it's pretty cool. I mean, I personally am more excited about this year's Dubai World Cup than I've been by one in any number of years, and the presence of California Chrome has a lot to do with that. Mike, what is the situation with the PPs for the Dubai card? When will they be available? Classic, when will they be available via Formulate?
Both should be available this afternoon. This is Wednesday. Both should be available Wednesday afternoon. So maybe by the time you're listening to this, they will already be posted. So you'll have a few days to take a look and handicap and come up with your opinions. And we've got 5 Americans so in the Dubai World Cup, and plus Candy Boy, who used to be a North American runner that many will remember. So you've got even without doing the deep dive handicap, you probably have a little bit of an opinion about some of the runners already.
Jonathan, is that the case with you? Do you have, even without looking at PPs, the way you're sort of leaning in this race, or are you going to withhold judgment?
Oh, no, I need to look. I'll need to look a little bit. Obviously, California Chrome was pretty impressive in the prep race there, as well as Frosted. I heard our friend Pat Cummings, who's kind of a Dubai master. He keeps up with that circuit really well. Heard him say that he thought there was going to be a lot of pace in the race, and that could give Keen Ice a legit opportunity. I was at the airport this morning trying to watch Mubtahija's. I'm sure he had a race leading up to this. I wanted to see how he came back from his campaign last year in America. I look forward to it. It's fun. Growing up in the Central Time Zone, there's not a lot of opportunities that I can eat breakfast and watch racing, and it's one of them. And it's a lot of fun, man. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy playing it. I don't swing very hard, but I do put some action bets in, and I'll play I'll play rolling pick threes in every race, and you can find some good value in those pools because, as you know, it's an American pool that we're playing in. It's not a pool that is being bet into from Dubai, since you can't wager there. So you can find a lot of American horses that are being overbet and European horses that are being ignored, and you can find some good value. So it's always fun. I've always had a good time with it.
What do you guys think is the best source to watch tape on a lot of these foreign horses? Are most of the relevant ones on YouTube, do you think? Is there any other source of tape from over there that's readily available to us?
Yeah, I think YouTube. I mean, I watched Frosted's race in HD this morning on YouTube, so that's always a good opportunity if it's one of the bigger prep races. But I also think maybe some of the smaller races. At one point in my life, I think I've gone to Maidan's website, and I think they have the replays there in high definition as well. I mean, if I'm wrong, it's because it's changed, but I would check that out too for sure.
Now, I think DRF's going to have Marcus Hirsch over there. Is that right, Mike? Is he over there covering?
He is there now, yes.
Make sure to look in the pages of DRF on DRF.com, DRF Live. We'll have a lot of Marcus stuff. I'd love to grab him for the Friday pod, but he's probably going to be too busy in the way the time change works and everything. Maybe we'll throw out a line to him just in case, but you can get all of Marcus's thoughts on the Dubai World Cup card if you are a regular visitor to DRF.com. He's got some great connections over there. We've heard him talk about foreign racing before on this show, and you can see how insightful and knowledgeable he is. So that's going to be one of the sources I'm going to be definitely paying attention to. And I'm just looking forward to diving into these PPs and seeing what we can come up with. If you come back into us, if you tune back in here on Friday, I'm sure in addition to the public handicapper races, are you guys up for at least looking at one or two of those Dubai races, or maybe just giving an overview of the card? Does that work for everybody?
Absolutely.
Works for me. Yep, sounds good.
So I mentioned in passing the dungeon before. I want Jonathan to give our listeners a little bit of a picture. I feel bad because we did a couple of really fun periscopes this last weekend. One was a journey up the Santa Anita downhill. That was my maiden voyage on Periscope. And then just a little bit more than 24 hours later, Jonathon made his maiden voyage on Periscope with a trip to the dungeon. Unfortunately, the way Periscope works, that stuff's only archived for 24 hours. So all I can say is, for future purposes, if you're following at UT Big Hair on Twitter or at Looms Boldly on Twitter, when we're doing Periscopes, we will notify you there, and then you'll have 24 hours to check it out. Because the scene in the dungeon, well, Jonathon, I'll just let you describe it.
Yeah, so, you know, it's just kind of like a tale of, like a little bit of a tale from the track, tales from the track. You know, I think that we all fell in, like we talked about before, we've all, like, you know, the guy, the giant, I think was his name, you mentioned before. We talk about all these characters that we fall in love with at the racetrack. And, you know, we've got to share our little bit about our experiences hanging out in the Eddie Logan and steak and eggs and Orcadia, bringing you a new drink before your other drink is gone. And then you go from that extreme of being in this luxurious room going down to the dungeon where the real racetrack people are. The guys that are betting 10-cent supers, the guys that are, you know, there's a guy watching the Oregon game. I kept trying to interview him, and you could tell that he wasn't on the right side of that. And they've got hot dogs and beer in plastic cups. And you know, we played a game called Quarters where you stand behind the blue line, the tiled floor blue line, and you're throwing quarters at the wall to see who can get the quarter the closest to the wall, and then you win a pot of money. It's just pure gambling, fun. It's authentic. There's no pretty ladies down there, you know, that are just there for the show and the fashion. It's the real deal, and it was so much fun. We had a really, really good time. Actually, there was a couple of pretty ladies that were with us, so no, you know, but we're like hanging out, so not. But in general,
you're going to get some nasty texts if any of them. I'm not sure that any of them will be listening to the show, but you're not making me friends, pal.
It's a room where everyone's got a nickname. There was toothless somebody. There was. I mean, it's just Raven, you know, Raven Mark, and it's just an amazing situation. We had a really good time, just to kind of get back to our roots of where we kind of all fell in love with the game.
And the place is, its typical name is so fancy, right? It's the Paddock Room.
Yeah, Paddock Room, but everyone calls it the Dungeon. That's the name of the street. They call it the Dungeon.
Jonathon, the other thing I want to point out is you don't have to tell the audience listening to this podcast what Quarters is. No, you know, you're gonna.
Well, that's good. I guess I'm the rookie.
I'll be honest, Pete. When I heard Quarters, I was thinking of that game where you try and land the quarter into the cup of beer.
There you go. That's what I thought it was when I first heard it.
Yeah.
There is another game, that's true, but I have seen this played in this version of the game played in various places before. It was pretty entertaining. It was awfully hard to try to capture it on Periscope, but apparently I did a halfway decent job because people seemed pretty amused anyway. Well, there you go, an impromptu tale from the track, Jonathon Kinchen. Mike, when you were growing up and going to OTBs in upstate New York, did they compare to this kind of a scene, or were they a little more genteel? I never went to one up there.
I wouldn't call them genteel by any stretch of the imagination, but not quite that crazy. Basically, it was a very small room, kind of a rectangular room with no windows in a strip mall next to a bar, and often which my grandfather would call the gin mill, which was not the name of the place, but he'd just say, oh, you know, let's put in our bets and we'll go watch the races at the gin mill. And before they even showed the races, my earliest memories of the OTB was just a very small, claustrophobic, smoke-filled room that had the racing form stapled to the wall or taped to the wall, and a bunch of old guys with cigars and cigarettes standing there against the wall reading and trying usually to look at the next race. Very few, maybe 5%, you know, 1 in 20, maybe there'd be 30 to 40 people in the room. Only 1 or 2 would have their own copy of the form. And they're all doing, back then the wagering menu was really an early double, a late double, exactas, quinellas, trifectas, win, place, and show, and that was it. So they're doing small bets mostly, focusing on the doubles, and certainly a lot of characters, but I didn't see any side gambling going on. If so the room was just kind of too small for it.
You mentioned the smoking thing. I can remember at one point that at least some of the New York OTBs sort of crossed over to where there was a smoking room. And I saw this most recently when I was going to the Breeders' Cup. I flew and transferred through Atlanta. I went from London, Lexington, and went through Atlanta. And they had one in the airport, and it's just the most dire-looking place where because it's like big clear glass doors, and it totally brought back memories of the OTB where you'd open it and the smoke would just be sort of billowing out, and even if you were within 10 yards of the thing, you were still pretty much getting the full effect. But it was just a strange thing that reminded me of the bad old days of New York City OTB. And I don't call them bad old days because the places were so bad. It's more just like they were the bad old days because they were the days before online wagering. And it just amazes me how far we've come now to be able to roll out of bed in your pajamas and go on and watch the races from Newmarket, or be up really late at night, or as we were down in the dungeon and watching races from Australia, and you can do that at home. And comparing and contrasting that to a time where you had to go to these little places with fluorescent lights where they imprisoned the smokers in glass cases. It's a very different world in 2016 than it was in 1997. That's all.
Well, and even from the smoking laws, I mean, back when I was first going to them, you could smoke on the airplanes. There weren't really non-smoking areas. You just had to deal with being a and I was a kid, so of course I wasn't a smoker. An 8-year-old kid is not, you just kind of had to deal with it. There were no steps taken to make sure that you had any level of comfort if you did not want to be around a smoky environment almost anywhere you went. But the other thing I will say is, back when I first started going to these OTBs, and you may remember it, Pete, I don't know when they changed over, but the New York OTBs not only did not show the races, so they would broadcast the races audio only, but it was back when they would have a blue screen, and they didn't have the numbers of horses. At the track, they'd have the numbers of horses, but on the OTBs, they would show, for whatever reason, the letters. You were betting not the 3 horse, but the C. And so you'd be rooting for this horse, and and if there's coupled wagerings, it was just confusing a lot of the time. But they would broadcast the audio replays on tape delay after the race went official. In the days prior to cell phones and anything like that, you had no idea of knowing what the outcome was, even though the race had been run, if there was an inquiry, as much as 5 to 10 minutes earlier. But that didn't stop all these guys for cheering as hard as they could for their horse to win in a race that had happened somewhere in the past. It was pretty funny.
That's amazing.
This is when you talk about the time difference in the cell phone. It reminded me of this really funny, quick story that this old timer told me one time in Grand Island, Nebraska, at Fauner Park. He told me that his uncle used to go to Santa Anita, and he used to sit. He had like an apartment that you could see the tote board, and he would sit in his window with binoculars, and he would look at the tote board, and he would call in the bets to his buddies back at Fauner Park to bet the race after it was already over.
The old school pass thing. Yeah, there's a lot of stories like that floating around, and a lot of people who ended up with damaged limbs. Leave it at that. All right, before we go, we got about 60 seconds, so quick answers here from both of you. First, Jonathan, contest activity this weekend, where are you playing?
I qualify for round 2, BC qualify. I believe there's an NHC qualify this weekend. I'm sure the DRF qualify. Keep an eye on for it. I'm sure they're going to get rolling pretty soon for Santa Anita's Preakness tournament. That's just my guess, but I would assume so.
You are correct. I'm not sure if it's announced yet, but I did hear a rumor that was happening. Mike, have you written anything new on the site, anything people should be looking to pay attention to, in particular on DRF.com, before we meet again?
I have not, although I will say I'm working on a new piece about trainer stats in the claiming game, you know, drops in claiming, claiming from, claiming by, that sort of stuff. So look for that. I'm working on it probably in the next week or so. We should have that live.
All right, fantastic.
Entries are open for the Preakness Challenge. $155, 1 in 38. That tournament is on Saturday, so get involved with that.
That'd be great. Join us out in the Eddie Logan suite for the Preakness contest at Santa Anita. I can't wait for that. Can't wait for
Friday. Or the dungeon. Or the dungeon.
Get the dungeon. You should contest for the dungeon, Jonathan. Put your money where your mouth is.
I might do that, seriously.
Oh, Friday's going to be an awesome show. We're going to talk Dubai. We're going to talk PH races. We have a special guest, one of maybe 2 or 3 baseball-related guests we're going to have in the coming months. Jerry Hunsicker will be joining us. Baseball fans know that name. If you don't know that name, tune in and meet him on Friday. That's going to be fun. So for Jonathon Kinchen, for Mike Hogan, I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. Thanks for listening, and may you win all your photos.